Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. I got an email from Jeff. The subject line is timing. Jared, love your channel. I read this talk this week and thought you would appreciate this. And then he includes a screenshot. We're going to go directly to the website for this. And then at the end, he says, the implications are pretty cool to think about. Here's the link to the talk. Thanks for all you do, especially your spreadsheets. Thank you, Jeff. I always appreciate just everybody that sends me these quotes, these hard to find things, thoughts, news items. It really helps. It's a big collaborative project that we're all working on together, and I'm trying to keep it all organized on my spreadsheets. So this is a BYU devotional talk by, at the time, Elder Dallin H. Oaks of the Quorum of the 12, January 29th, 2002. Where were you in 2002? Me, at this point, I had just graduated high school. Okay, at this point of the talk, he says, as this example shows, continuing revelation is the means by which the Lord administers his timing. We need that revelatory direction. For example, many of us or our descendants will doubtless participate in the fulfillment of prophecies about the building of the city of New Jerusalem. And then he says, see Doctrine and Covenants 84, 2-4. And so Jeff said at the end here, the implications are pretty cool to think about. And yeah, they are. He does say us or our descendants, and you could take that to an extreme and say, well, your descendants could be generations from now. You know, Jeff, I'm not of that point of view. I do believe that many of us are going to be here to see it, help build it. Not just our descendants, but that's just my opinion, just based on what we've seen in the church and how things are accelerating and hastening, and we're seeing so many signs. But I do have an interest beyond that in this quote. Let me just read the rest of it. He says, but in this matter, the timing is the Lord's, not ours. We will not be approved or blessed in clearing the ground or pouring the footings for that great project until the Lord has said that it is time. In this, as in so many other things, the Lord will proceed in his own time and in his own way. We prepare in the way the Lord has directed. We hold ourselves in readiness to act on the Lord's timing. He will tell us when the time is right to take the next step. For now, we simply concentrate on our own assignments and on what we have been asked to do today. In this, we are also mindful of the Lord's assurance. I will hasten my work in its time. Okay, so at this point, I want to focus on this orange highlight, clearing the ground or pouring the footings for that great project. I have a spreadsheet called Quotes, Common Misconceptions, and I have a bunch of misconceptions for the topic New Jerusalem. And one of those is New Jerusalem, in other words, the final center place or center stake of Zion, and not referring to the old Jerusalem, but the New Jerusalem. We'll have the two Jerusalems during the millennium. The New Jerusalem will be in Salt Lake City, not Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. So there's always debate over everything, especially when it comes to Second Coming stuff. And a lot of people turn to their own wisdom and interpretation of Scripture or their own internal reasoning. I prefer to go with the Scriptures as well as the words of modern day prophets. And I've added this to the spreadsheet because, as you can see here, if Salt Lake City is going to be the New Jerusalem, Elder Dallin H. Oaks will not say that the ground still needs to be cleared, the pourings and the footings need to take place for that great project. The city of Salt Lake City is already built. You have the two blocks that make up Temple Square and the church office building plaza block that has the administration building, Joe Smith Memorial Building. And we've talked about this ad nauseum. Salt Lake City was patterned after the original plan for New Jerusalem, or the city of Zion, in Independence, Missouri, with its grid-like layout and the two center blocks that, if they had built the city the first time in Independence, there would have been a 24 temple complex. The temples would have been multi-purpose buildings We still don't know exactly how they would have been used, excuse me, but they were grouped into groups of 3, and each group corresponded with an office of the priesthood. But it's pretty clear that it was meant to be not only to like have a temple the way that we think of temples there, but also to be like an administrative center, to have different temples for different purposes. And we've actually looked into that a little bit. But anyway, so yeah, Salt Lake has been laid out similar to how New Jerusalem would have been laid out, or how it was going to be laid out. But Elder Oaks here says that the clearing of the ground, the pouring of the footings, that hasn't happened yet. It's not Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City had already been established by the year 2002. In fact, oh my gosh, yeah. I don't know exactly when the Winter Olympics started. When the Winter Olympics started. I think it was the next month in February. But yeah, it's safe to say that Salt Lake already had the ground cleared and all that stuff done just in time for the Winter Olympics. Anyway, I'm a dork. This row, currently 27, on this spreadsheet is actually the one that I have the most quotes and scriptures for. It goes on forever. It's abundantly clear, from Doctrine and Covenants to Joseph Smith to Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, Orson Pratt, so on and so forth, many, many others, that this is the case, that Independence, Missouri in Jackson County is still the site for the city of New Jerusalem, the literal city. Now, I want to point out just a few things really quick. I want to point out that they talk about it in the church manual, Gospel Principles. It says here, the Lord said the city will be built in the state of Missouri in the United States. That was published in 2011. It's in the Doctrine and Covenants student manual. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can pause and read it. It just talks about the fact that this is still the case. Here's another part of the Doctrine and Covenants student manual. Jackson County continues to be designated by the Lord as the location for the city of New Jerusalem. A lot of people get caught up on, well, we were excused. No, we weren't excused. We were temporarily excused. Temporarily. There's other scripture that talks about the fact that Zion will not be moved out of her place, like it says right here, D&C 101:17. And then we have President Nelson, who 2 separate times in 2 different books, his book, or this book, Teachings of Russell M. Nelson, and then his book called Daily Joy, he talks about the New Jerusalem in Jackson County. Let me just read it. This is President Nelson. You can read one evening about Jesus' responsibility as judge. You know that the day will come when each one of us will stand before him to be judged. Then read of his responsibility as the millennial Messiah and what that will mean when he will reign and rule from 2 world headquarters, from Jerusalem of old and from New Jerusalem in Jackson County. Then he will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then finally, it's also on the gospel topics and questions. If you look at the entry for Zion, it gives the different definitions of Zion. So this is for people that have questions about doctrine and prophecy. You go to the gospel library, you have gospel topics and questions, and this is the answer that they're going to find. The New Jerusalem, which will be built in Jackson County, Missouri. That's what the church is teaching. That's what the president of the church is teaching. But I want to finish this part of the video with this. We have an interesting quote from President Dallin H. Oaks from the October 2024 General Conference. The name of the talk is Follow Christ. It's interesting that it happened during that General Conference. That's the one where President Nelson gave his big Second Coming talk. But he says this: the Lord's commandments are of 2 types: permanent, like the doctrine of Christ, and temporary. Temporary commandments are those necessary for the needs of the Lord's church or the faithful in temporary circumstances, but to be set aside when the need has passed. An example of temporary commandments are the Lord's directions to the early leadership of the church to move the saints from New York to Ohio to Missouri and to Illinois, and finally to lead the pioneer exodus to the Intermountain West. Though only temporary, when still in force, these commandments were given to be obeyed. So the church headquarters, okay, currently it is the center stake, but it's a temporary center stake. The Intermountain West, it's temporary. And that's not to say that everybody's going to come to Missouri. That's another misconception that I have on this spreadsheet. I think most people are going to stay put, and this area is just going to naturally grow the way that the Lord directs. But at some point, the headquarters of the church is going to move from Salt Lake City to New Jerusalem in what is now Independence, Jackson County, Missouri. Now, there were a couple other things I wanted to point out in this talk. This is a really good talk, especially if you're grappling with this issue right now, the Lord's timing. If you're not married yet, but you want to get married, or you're trying to have a child, or you're wondering about your career and your housing or a family situation or whatever, this is a really good talk that I would highly recommend. But I'm just going to highlight a portion of it here. Okay, so, well, this part has a little bit more to do with like prophecy and the direction of the church, but then at the end there's like something that has to do more with like personal timing in our individual lives. Okay, he says, it is not enough that we are under a call or even that we are going in the right direction. The timing must be right. And if the timing is not right, our actions should be adjusted to the Lord's timetable as revealed by his servants. That's really interesting. So you can be doing the right thing, living your life according to the commandments and staying on the covenant path. But there's also this third piece, or this other piece, that has to do with timing. Like it's not just, you skip forward to whatever it is that you want or that you know is going to happen. There is a timing issue. The Lord's timing is often revealed in this way. Several years ago, President Hinckley announced the construction of a large number of new temples. And it's so interesting to read this now, after having seen President Nelson and all the temples that he is announcing. So think about that as we continue. Several years ago, President Hinckley announced the construction of a large number of new temples, essentially doubling the number of operating temples of the church from about 50 to about 100 in just a few years. Having additional temples has always been the direction to go, but until the prophet of the Lord signaled this as a major initiative, no one could have properly urged such a sudden and dramatic increase for the church and its people. Only the Lord's prophet could move the whole church west. Only the Lord's prophet could signal the church to double its operating temples in just a few years. So it's interesting. He's comparing the movement of the saints west it's like on the same scale of importance and church history as all these temples that are being constructed. And now we're having a second round of this, of like a large number of temples. But this one is even larger than the previous one by President Hinckley. Something major is going on right now, but we've talked about that plenty. Okay, continuing. In my conference talk last October, I gave another illustration, the importance of following the Lord's timing with those we try to interest in hearing the gospel message. Proclaiming the gospel is his work, not ours, and therefore it must be done on his timing, not ours. There are nations in the world today that must hear the gospel before the Lord will come again. We know this, but we cannot force it. We must wait upon the Lord's timing. He will tell us, and he will open the doors or bring down the walls when the time is right. We should pray for the Lord's help and direction so that we can be instruments in his hands to proclaim the gospel to nations and persons who are now ready. Persons he would have us help today. The Lord loves all of his children, and he desires that all have the fullness of his truth and the abundance of his blessings. He knows when groups or individuals are ready, and he wants us to hear and heed his timetable for sharing his gospel with them. Now, what's interesting to think about, and we've talked about this a million times, since 2002, the internet has expanded. It's become more advanced. We're doing a lot more with it. It's becoming more ubiquitous. And so I really think that the internet is tearing down some of these walls. With people that before the internet would not have had the opportunity to find the church, I think a lot of them are finding the church now. We've also talked about all the just upheaval in geopolitics within recent decades or since 2002. It seems to me, and I can't quantify this, but it seems to me that we've had a lot more immigrants and refugees coming from places where they didn't have access to the gospel. So I think that's another wall that's being torn down. There's a lot that's different between the year 2002 and 2025. And anyway, I've done videos about this, but I think that a lot of those walls are coming down. Okay, and lastly, I really like this last part of his talk. This is more focused on the individual rather than prophecy and the church as a whole. He says, commit yourself to put the Lord first in your life. Keep his commandments and do what the Lord's servants ask you to do. Then your feet are on the pathway to eternal life. When it does, then it does not matter whether you are called to be a bishop or a Relief Society president, whether you're married or single, or whether you die tomorrow. You do not know what will happen. Do your best on what is fundamental and personal, and then trust in the Lord and his timing. Life has some strange turns. I really like this because I feel like that's been my entire life, especially right now. Life has some strange turns. I will share some personal experiences that illustrate this. When I was a young man, I thought I would serve a mission. I graduated from high school in June 1950. Thousands of miles away, 1 week after that high school graduation, a North Korean army crossed the 38th parallel and our country was at war. I was 17 years old, but as a member of the Utah National Guard, I was soon under orders to prepare for mobilization and active service. Oh, great. I'm sure that was pleasant. Suddenly, for me and for many other young men of my generation, the full-time mission we had planned or assumed was not to be. Another example, after I served as president of BYU for 9 years, I was released. A few months later, the governor of the state of Utah appointed me to a 10-year term on the Supreme Court of this state. And by the way, I think, we all realize the implications that President Oaks, who, if President Nelson passes away, he'll become the next president of the church. We've talked about the fact that President Nelson is the heart surgeon. He works on the heart. He's working on the heart of the church to make us pure in heart, Zion of one heart, one mind. But then right after him, if President Oaks does become president of the church, well, he's a judge. So healing, preparing a heart and a mind, and then comes the judge. I don't know. We'll see how things play out. All right, continuing. When I was 48 years old, my wife June and I tried to plan the rest of our lives. We all do that. Me and Jenica have done that. I had a completely different plan for my life. I would have still been in Utah, and I would have finished my accounting degree and been an accountant. That was my plan, and it was a good plan. That was a wise plan, I think. But I'm glad that I followed the Spirit. So this resonates. My wife, June, and I tried to plan the rest of our lives. We wanted to serve the full-time mission. Neither of us had been privileged to serve. We planned that I would serve 20 years on the state Supreme Court. Then, at the end of 2 10-year terms, when I would be nearly 69 years old, I would retire from the Supreme Court, and we would submit our missionary papers and serve a mission as a couple. I had my 69th birthday last summer and was vividly reminded of that important plan. If things had gone as we planned, I would now be submitting papers to serve a mission with my wife, June. 4 years after we made that plan, I was called to the quorum of the 12 apostles, something we never dreamed would happen. Yeah, how could you possibly dream that that's going to happen or think it's going to happen? That is quite the twist in life, becoming an apostle. Realizing then that the Lord had different plans and different timing than we had assumed, I resigned as a justice of the Supreme Court, but this was not the end of the important differences. When I was 66, my wife June died of cancer. 2 years later, a year and a half ago, I married Kristen McCain. Kristen McMain, the eternal companion who now stands at my side. I have this highlighted because there's like this thing going on. It feels like it's been going on for like a couple years now, where there's just like this attack on plural marriage, and I don't care to really get into it. I've done a video about it before, but like there's like this argument where people don't want to accept that, like a situation like this, you have President Oaks, who was married and sealed to his first wife. She passes away, and then he gets remarried and sealed again, and he now has two eternal companions. And it's the same thing with President Nelson. And people want to say, well, no, he's just going to have one. No, that's not true. That is not true. He says it right here, but then he says it again later. Okay, continuing. How fundamentally different my life is than I sought to plan. My professional life has changed. My personal life has changed. But the commitment I made to the Lord to put him first in my life and to be ready for whatever he would have me do has carried me through these changes of eternal importance. Faith and trust in the Lord give us the strength to accept and persist, whatever happens in our lives. I did not know why I received a no answer to my prayers for the recovery of my wife of many years. That reminds me of President Holland. He said something very similar recently because his wife had passed away. And that's what he talked about in that talk, Motions of a Hidden Fire, which was the first talk of the April 2024 General Conference, where he talked about his near-death experience. Anyway, but the Lord gave me a witness that this was his will, and he gave me the strength to accept it. 2 years after her death, I met this wonderful woman who is now my wife for eternity. And I know that this also was the will of the Lord. I return to the subject with which I began. Now, pay attention to this. This is good advice for all of us. Do not rely on planning every event of your life, even every important event. Stand ready to accept the Lord's planning and the agency of others in matters that inevitably affect you. Plan, of course, but fix your planning on personal commitments that will carry you through no matter what happens. Anchor your life to eternal principles and act upon those principles, whatever the circumstances and whatever the actions of others. Then you can await the Lord's timing and be sure of the outcome in eternity. The most important principle of timing is to take the long view. Mortality is just a small slice of eternity, but how we conduct ourselves here, what we become by our actions and desires, confirmed by our covenants and the ordinances administered by the proper authority, will shape our destiny for all eternity. As the prophet Amulek taught, this life is the time for men to prepare to meet God. Alma 34:32. That reality should help us take the long view, the timing of eternity. So, I love that so much. This is a lesson that I've had to learn in my life, because I'm sure all of us do this to some extent. We try and plan our future. We try and plan the rest of our lives. And that is what we should do. We should have a plan. We shouldn't be directionless in life, but we need to be flexible. Like I said, I think that I came up with a pretty good plan. You know, I was going to Salt Lake Community College, about to transfer to the University of Utah, and I'll spare you the whole story. I've told it before, but I didn't become an accountant. I did something else, and then after that, I joined the military, and then anyway, I'm telling you the story. it all worked out so much better than I could have imagined. And what I'm doing now, it was like inconceivable back then, back when Jenica and I were first married, and even less conceivable before that. So the Lord sees the big picture. He sees the future. He knows what's going to happen. He knows opportunities that are going to come up, and he knows when you're actually ready. So just plan, but focus on the here and now, and do the best that you can right now. And then just be flexible and be willing to change your plan. You know, sometimes we don't want to change our plan out of pride because we're trying to maybe achieve something and we have something to prove to the world. But the Lord will use you as his instrument if you allow him to. And he can make so much more. He can make so much more out of your life than you can. You know, it's a partnership. It still requires your agency, and for you to, and even then, sometimes he'll let you come up with your own solutions to things as you do his work. It's not all 100% dictated, but it's a really good idea to follow promptings. It really, really is. I have a testimony of that. I testify of that. So anyway, I'm probably going to put some of these other things that we read on other spreadsheets. Again, my focus is not plural marriage, but I stick to the words of the prophets. Okay? The scriptures and the prophets, and there's a lot that they've said, and this is just one of those things. So, okay, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.